one of the things that keeps coming back also in this chapter is, why do we tend to be our worst selves in our romantic relationships? And I think that's an interesting question, but for me, I think the even more interesting question is like, how can we use those things to find liberation, right? Like, how can we use all of those triggers, all of those feelings of possessiveness, of ownership, of all of these things that capitalism and heterosexuality and everything has taught us about like what it means to be in relationship to each other? How can we use like the disentanglement of ourselves from those systems in these relationships by working with our triggers to find liberation and to like research that like really in like the everyday life, right?
Hello, and welcome to Pieces, the podcast, where we'll work on outlining the intersection of our personal and political work.
Here, we want to create a place to talk about how our relationships with ourselves and our communities are inherently political, integrate the knowledge we have received and continue to receive, and speak to and dream of justice, love, and community.
Hi there. Who are you, and how are you?
I am Carson. My pronouns are any with a preference for they, them. And I work on this intersection of the personal and the political and the political and the personal. So really looking at like how they're intertwined. And I am good. I'm a little bit sleepy. It's very warm here. I'm in Spain. And I'm very excited to speak with you about this very interesting book that we have both read. And yeah, to introduce some of the projects that we're going to be working on, which is going to be really nice. How are you?
Yeah, you. I'm Ella. I've got a bit of a they-he situation going on at the moment. Um, I was recently reminded of the term conflict doula to describe what it is that I do, which I think is great, and how I'm currently feeling. A little bit annoyed at all of the tech issues we had getting started, but deep down, a sense of love and excitement for you. And the fact that we're back doing a podcast after at least 6 months of not recording anything.
Long time.
And I think that this book, what we're going to be talking about today, as Carson so delightfully teased, is Love in a Fucked Up World: How to Build Relationships, Hook Up, and Raise Hell Together by Dean Spade. You were the one who introduced it to me. Maybe you want to say how you stumbled across this book.
Well, actually, one of my partners gave it to me for my birthday and was like, you should probably read this because it seems like it's really up your alley. And then I was reading it, and basically, the farther I got into the book, the farther I was thinking about, like, oh, this is very parallel to the work I think that you and I are trying to do, and a lot of the things that we have talked about and kind of investigated and thought about from our own experience, but also from the things that we see around us. And yeah, that's then I sent it to you in Switzerland because I was like, Ellie, you need to read this book right away. You need to read it right away. And then it took like 3 months to get there, and then you read it. And then you came up with a very nice plan.
Yeah. I'm going to be transparent with the audience just a little bit, let you in on a peek behind the curtain. In September, I'm going to be launching a new program where duos of any sorts, so like friends, lovers, comrades, can come and work with me and kind of move away from that individualistic lens of like going to therapy and working on yourself and kind of like being seen as this individual person, to coming in as a duo and working on a relationship and being like, how do we relate to each other? How do our patterns kind of come up in this, and how can we practice new ways of relating to each other that we can then bring out into like a wider ripple through society? And I think that this is very amazing work, but I found it was very hard to get across like activism and consent work and conflict work and like all these different things that I feel very passionate about. I find it hard to like pitch in one sentence and hope that people like understand what it is that I'm trying to do. So when you gave me the gift of this book, I was like, this is exactly it. This book explains so much of like my brain and my thoughts and my approach to things. So I thought that if we did a little bit of a book club, and read a chapter, a podcast episode. I'm not saying what time frame this is coming out in. Uh, then we'd be able to dive deep into this and kind of explain what it is that we are working on to like the layperson.
Yeah, also because I think reading this book really gave me the feeling of, wow, like Dean Spade has such a specific and eloquent way of explaining a lot of the things that I think we've been trying to figure out how to explain, and that was really exciting. And yeah, also big promo for this book because we are not getting paid for this. This is just like an excellent, excellent read, and it has a lot of also very concrete tools, right, that you can use in your daily life. Um, so yeah, I am very excited to do this with you.
Yeah, and speaking to his writing style, like I read the book and now I'm going back into it and I'm trying to pick out things that we would like to talk about or quotes I'd like to highlight for this episode. And the way that he manages to put really complex ideas and thoughts into such a simple sentence kind of went over my head the first time I read it. Because I was like, okay, yeah, I get it, I get it. But then reading it again, and I was like, wow, you have used your words so carefully to have really big, complex ideas in very
Mhm.
grounded, simple language
Yeah.
that really hits to like the core of what it is you're trying to talk about. And I really appreciated that about this book.
So yay, let's get started.
Let's get started.
Okay, so there was actually one quote from the introduction that I think I wanted to read just because I was like, oh, this feels very relevant also to like what we're doing. And I feel like for me it kind of summarized, I guess, like my perspective also really on the work, and I think also your like this perspective that we've developed together on why we work on the relational, right? Because I still find that sometimes and especially like when I speak about romantic relationships that like I can be met with like a little bit of like eye rolling or like, oh well, like that's like an individualist thing. Or and I thought this quote, which is in the introduction, was like really grabbed me, so maybe we can start with that one.
Sure.
So Dean Spade says, relationships are a place where we can practice our principles and values rather than acting out messed up cultural scripts fed to us by corporate media. If we want to build a world organized around care, connection, and freedom, we must combine our work out there with rigorous work in our intimate lives. Thoughts?
um, I think that this is really important because there is this weird dichotomy of thinking that I think is really hard to grasp, which is like there are structural issues in the way that we have like structured our systems and society that need like direct collective action to fight against. But the reason they are there is because of human beings making decisions that they thought were the best decisions based off of their like morals and values and ways that they operate the world. Um, and so trying to fight these systems without having done any of the work to untangle like the moral value system behind the decision making, if you still fully believe in exactly the same values that like brought capitalism and all of these different structures there, and then you try to fight them, you're just going to like come up with a band-aid solution that pretty much does the same thing but just expressed in a different way. And so this focus initially on how do I relate to others, what values do I have, and how do I practice those values, how do I like live them in my day-to-day life, is so important to changing that script and realizing that you are the decision maker that makes up society. Like we're all part of that.
Yeah, I so that's also kind of like what I'm thinking about it, right? Like I see it as within this quote, and like I think he goes on to do it throughout the book. There's like this integration of like our individual role and the system role. And like it's not even just that they're like mirror images of each other, but that they're so intertwined. So this idea of cultural scripts, which he goes on also to develop in the next chapter or in like chapter one, so in the next chapter, is like, what are the things that we have been told by society are normal, are natural, are correct, are good, and kind of like looking at how those things have infiltrated our minds and our personalities. And one of the really like nice things I think he does is identify like this idea of autopilot. And I don't think I've talked that much about Terry Real yet on this podcast. Terry Real is like my new kind of interest, and like his perspective on like relationships. He would kind of say that it's like the child, the like the inner child, right? But he calls it the, what is it, the adaptive child. So this black and white thinking, rigidity, like a lot of these stuff also come from these systems that we're put in. And what I really like about Dean Spade's work is he really denaturalizes those cultural scripts. So to really take this stance of like, and this is why I think that this work is so integrated into like a larger activist or revolutionary perspective, is because we cannot expect these systems to change treating each other in the same ways, right? So if I am like an advocate for liberation and I am working on a lot of like big community projects and like trying to figure out how to, but I'm a dick to my partner, like this is a problem. And actually, like that relationship and that way that I am interacting with this other person, whether it be my partner, my friend, my parent, my sister, whatever, right? Whatever close relationship I have, like what I think a lot of the identification is that Spade is doing in this book is saying like actually most of those kinds of things that we're doing, like when we're behaving in this way, they're ways that the system has kind of implanted itself and infiltrated itself into our personality, and we have begun to like mistakenly um identify with that, so think that it's ours.
He says on page 14, when we mistake these cultural messages as our own feelings and desires, our relationships follow damaging patterns set up for us by dominant culture. I flagged a bunch of these quotes because I wanted to get into it. Yeah, when he's talking about how there are these mainstream ideas of sex and romance that literally teach us what to want, and the part that I really enjoyed here was those beliefs, even when we intellectually understand them to be distortions, impact our feelings and behavior. What do they do to our ability to thrive together, and how do we get out from under their control? Yeah, mainstream society talks about like romance and sex and the scripts and narratives that kind of dictate to us what it is that we want, and makes a distinction here that we can intellectually understand them to be distortions, but we still prescribe to them kind of on a more emotional level that feels a little bit deeper than your intellectual processing. And an example of when this really rang true for me is like a month ago. Rohan and I were at his like childhood best friend's wedding, and I also just got married and didn't do a traditional wedding at all. Like nothing about that resonated with me. But when I saw this woman walking out in like a white dress, and her dad was walking her down the aisle, and he got to the front and he started crying, and he like gave his daughter to her new husband, and I burst into tears. I was sobbing. Rohan had already been like stopped crying since as soon as we arrived. He was just like, "Oh my god, I love love," and it's like I don't believe in any of this stuff, but I feel so culturally like force fed the idea that this is the most magical day of your life, and how much you can be daddy's little girl and he loves you so much, and how difficult it must be to like see you all grown up. He's letting you go. And it's like, I don't believe any of this. Like intellectually, I don't believe any of this. And yet it got me. And I think that this is something that we can like look at.
Yeah, well, I think like this is also one of the things that's mentioned in the book also, right? Like that we're given, and I think Spade talks about it specifically in relation to the romantic relationship. I mean, when we look at what we are force fed in terms of movies, in terms of books, in terms of music, like so many of our kind of cultural narratives around what it means to grow up, what it means to be whole, right? Like this idea that your partner is going to like be your other half. Um, a lot of those ideas are around romance, and I think it's quite funny because I think my mom really tried to like keep me away from a lot of like the Disney princess kind of vibes growing up because she was just like, I don't like this. Your goal should not be to get married. Like this is like not like happily ever after is not a real thing. And so she, I think in that sense really tried to give me alternatives. But I mean, like you're a kid, like also popular culture is real, right? Like you get bombarded with them anyway. And I think like it's that romantic, it's a specifically like heterosexual imagination of what it means to live a good life, right? It's this idea that like you're gonna find your other half, and that other half will be the opposite gender of you because there are two genders. And then after you find that person, then you're going to live happily ever after. Your relationship is never going to end. You're never going to fight. But also, like, we're not really given any script after kind of like the marriage moment, right? Like, this is also something that I think is interesting.
Well, then it's just happily ever after.
Yeah, exactly. So then you should just be fine and have no problems and never need help in your marriage. But what I think is like important for me to recognize is it's just like, oh yeah, like I have been force fed kind of these ideas because I also have it like this kind of like envy almost when I see kind of like, especially like more normative heterosexual couples. I'm like, oh yeah, like they're like living the dream. Like, I don't know, like it's not, and it's not like I'm intellectually convinced of this, but it's just this like momentary like impulse towards like this jolt almost. It's almost like I'm getting like smacked by the system. Like, yeah, there's just this moment where I feel, mhm,
I still try to come up with like the father daughter dance. Like,
yeah,
what song would I do, and like what kind of like dance would we do? Would it be funny? Would it be sentimental? Like all this kind of stuff. And then I'm like, oh, I already got married and I didn't do that, and I'm not interested in that.
yeah, because like it's about the fantasy, right? So I
Hmm.
think like this is a really important, actually, like this is what how I feel about it is it's like this jolt, right? Like this momentary slap back into this is what we're trained to want. It's not about the desire per se as like the desire itself to like do the actual thing. It's about the fantasy of the thing and what I've been taught that that fantasy means. And I think like that is one of the ways that I've started to kind of like deconstruct this is it's just like, okay, like I actually just like go with it. I'm like, all right, so what would that mean? What would that look like? What would my life look like? Is that what I'm trying to do? Is that something that would make me happy? Is it aligned with me? And so rather than kind of like allowing that system to kind of smack me back into my place and be like, oh, well, I guess I'm over here again and this is just like where I have to be or like this desire that I feel is inherently mine to kind of try and step out of it and be like, okay, but where does this come from? Because like I'm a sucker for like romantic music. Like I love romantic music. And I'm just like listening to it and I'm like, oh, imagine I had my possessive Prince Charming who like only loved me and like and then if I actually like just like let myself go with that and kind of think about like okay what does that mean, what does that look like, then I'm like oh that doesn't feel so good.
Yeah, and I think all of these conversations also bring me back to when I was way more interested in heterosexual dating, which also just a time of when I was more interested in like social clout in general. And like I always felt everyone was very clear my entire life that I would not be cool. And so I wasn't like trying to be cool, but I still wanted like belonging and social acceptance and all of these things. And I remember like going out, like dancing or clubbing was not about dancing. It was very much like, can you find the most attractive person in the room to kind of like dance with or be seen dancing with or be seen making out with or whatever, so that it's not about hooking up with this person because there's a general connection there. It's like this is a very like tall, handsome, attractive man who has social clout. And if I'm seen with him, I will also have social clout, and that will like boost my desirability. And I remember like those were just my thoughts about it. Like I was always like, oh yeah, that guy's really hot. Like I should go for him. Um, because it's a social currency, because it's these things that bring you status and power, and those are things that you want because you want to have like influence over people. And I think that this is also what they go back into. The very first quote is everything worthwhile is done with other people, which is a Mariama Kaba, we do this till we free us quote. And it's like, it's true. We are hardwired for social connection. We are hardwired for belonging and inclusion, and we want to stay together with other people. And therefore, we are likely to swallow things, our true desires, or not even ask ourselves what our true desires are, and just let this kind of, we are all the same, there is one correct way to be, and let's just follow that path kind of thinking that brings you such ease. You know, you don't have to think, you don't have to go through the painful work of saying what is it that I want and how can I say no and stop this, when I can just like flow and everyone will love me.
Yeah, and I mean, I think like a lot of the things that you say resonate kind of with this idea of that these are integrations of the larger kind of dominant system into our minds and into our personalities and into our relationships also, right? Like this idea of using another person to increase your own social clout. Like, yeah, I think if we're really honest, this is stuff that we've all done. Like, I know I've also done it, right? Like, look at a person and be like, what would you mean for me socially, right? So not even like about like, hey, how would you and how would your growth and my growth like be able to be together and like make us into beautiful people? Like, no, like it's really like if I'm with you, then I have access to certain social things. And I think like this is for me a really big, like an emblematic kind of thing of how capitalism and kind of like this like modernity kind of way of moving through the world, especially now with social media, where like we still are kind of projecting this view of our life onto the internet. And it's like, so if my beautiful heterosexual relationship with my tall, sexy boyfriend, it takes really nice pictures, then that would be really good for like my social clout. But then it's like actually super dehumanizing, right, to this other person. And I'm not saying that like from that you can't go and develop like a deeper relationship and or like that like having attraction to someone because of like I don't know how they move through the world is wrong, because like I think that all of these things kind of can be true at once, right? Like you can be attracted to someone because of how they move through the world, but there's like this kind of intrinsic like competition, kind of like using of someone else for building up your own mental clout or how you see yourself. And like it's good for me to be with this person or to be linked to this person because that means that I am XYZ, right? And this is something that I think is important to interrogate.
Yeah. Dean Spade gets into it when he's talking about like disposability culture and the dehumanizing aspect of, first of all, he ties it to like racial capitalism and how for so long we've had to systematically dehumanize large sections of the population to justify incarcerating them, putting them in cages, and just like killing them and saying these people are worthy to be killed. And that is like a structure that racial capitalism has been built upon and that our value system has been built upon.
Mm-hmm.
But like that's on the kind of deeper structural level, but then also it's just this disposability culture of how we treat other people and say, okay, you can be beneficial to me and kind of raise my status here, but there could always be someone better. There could always be someone hotter, someone taller, someone with more money in the bank.
Smarter.
And how can I make sure that I'm always with the best partner so that I'm also seen as the best version of myself? And in what ways am I looking to trade up and kind of let go of people because you don't want to be caught with like a loser partner? Then you're trapped.
Yeah, and I think like this is obviously I agree completely like with Spade's analysis that this comes from racial capitalism, right? And this is actually something that we've talked about on a different podcast before. This idea that like the dehumanization of, for example, white supremacy, but basically any kind of system is necessary in order to kind of sustain the system. And that this is probably one of the biggest kind of like spiritual wounds that people who are participating in the dominating structures, right? Whether it be white people participating in white supremacy, men participating in patriarchy, rich people participating in like dominating and continuing to exploit the work of poor people. Like we need this dehumanizing aspect. And I think that for me rings so true and is so relevant both for how we move through the world, like how we treat other people, but also for how we look at ourselves. Because, like, what is our relationship to ourself like if we are aware that other people are probably thinking in a similar way? Of like saying, how can I trade up for the next best friend or partner or, you know, action group, or like if we're consistently in this space where we're always looking to like get better or like to level up, right? We know that other people are probably looking at us like this. And so what does that do also to like the core of our trust in our communities, in the core of our trust in our relationships? Like if we're having like this fear that people are gonna just like ditch us the moment that they find something better, or that we're gonna ditch someone the moment that we find something better. Like how does this keep our relationships at like a shallow level, and how do we kind of start to counter this?
Completely. This is like in page 19. I took notes. Um, so a great thing about this book as well is that he has tons of like guiding questions. So you can then sit and reflect on things, and then there are like worksheets and things to do throughout the book. It's a really nice book. And this is in the section where he's talking about conflict. But one of the questions is, can you imagine or have you experienced difference and conflict in relationships generating more connection, belonging, autonomy, and creativity rather than less? What supports that? And I think that that ties into this point a lot of like, so often we are taught to avoid conflict and to avoid like scrutinizing ourselves and learning what it is, because we think it'll be easier if we just put that work aside, stay superficial, and stay like everyone's having a good time, we're all going to be great. But this brings this like intense fear, because I know that I'm swallowing a bunch of stuff that I'm actually mad about, and I'm pretending everything's fine. So if they are also swallowing a bunch of stuff and pretending everything's fine, then maybe this relationship isn't as secure as I thought it was. And that makes me scared. And that means I'm going to test you to figure out, do you actually like me? And is everything actually okay? Or maybe not. And then that behavior of feeling so scared and insecure and not knowing how to like express that usually leads to the very behaviors that people then get really mad about, and that causes a huge conflict, and then the relationship falls apart and you're like, see, it's because of conflict. When like if you have a way of bringing conflict in and saying, hey, I'm really worried about this, or I didn't like what you said, and also I would like to trust you that you will give me feedback if I'm not doing something that you don't like, then we have the proof and the history and the practice in our bodies and in our relationships that we know how to voice these things, we can work through them, and we come out closer, knowing each other better, and in a more intimate relationship. Because I define intimacy as feeling seen and feeling safe. So the more that you're able to be seen and realize, oh, this person isn't leaving me, we're still safe, the more intimate it can become.
Yeah, and I just want to like specify two definitions here, like the one of conflict, because like I think when people hear conflict, sometimes they think about like, oh, like a big fight, like you had a fight with someone. Like, no, conflict can also be like you do something, someone else doesn't like it, and they're just like, hey, I didn't like that. Like that is, I think, like we're also including in like this large spectrum that is conflict. And the second one about safety, because like I think that this is an important thing to start to think through a little bit. Being safe or feeling safe does not necessarily mean that you feel good. Like sometimes it feels bad, but it still can be safe. Like, as in, like, I feel like in the language of safety, sometimes we have integrated a lot of like what I would kind of categorize as like a Western or like a white like colonial capitalist framework of comfort, like that we are all entitled to be comfortable, and that for a space to be safe, that means that we cannot be challenged, we cannot feel uncomfortable, cannot deal with different difficult things. And I think that it's important to challenge this notion of safety and say safety is actually related to how much you feel the commitment of the other person and how much you feel your own commitment to caring for the relationship. And that can also be like, for example, you and I have a commitment to our relationship. And in order to care for that, that means that sometimes like we have to bring up difficult things or like have more kind of like tricky conversations in which maybe you did something I don't like, maybe I did something you don't like, and that we are able to talk about that. That's not always like, it doesn't always feel good. Like it's not like, oh, like yay, this is my favorite thing to do. Like no, but it does feel safe because I know that you're not just gonna like pack up and leave. Like if you want to end the relationship, I know that you will be clear with me about that, and also that it's not going to be like a sudden cutoff. Like it would be a longer conversation, I think. And so like I don't have that fear, right? And that's what safety means also, I think, in the way that we're using it. Not just, oh, everything is like great and I feel so comfortable. And because yeah,
No.
like I do think that that's like a co-optation of what safety can look like. Whereas I think that actually finding like grounded safety in our relationships is an uncomfortable process.
That's actually literally what I wrote down in my notes about this of like um I just wrote we try to avoid difficult things, not realizing that the hard part is the best part. And I think Spade gets into this in this chapter as well of like how often we try to numb ourselves out and just kind of stay in this state of comfort and bliss and just being like, okay, if we can just numb ourselves to the horrors of exploitation and all of this stuff, then we feel this very flat affect. So then we have to search for things that bring us excitement and joy because we're not feeling anything. And so much of this work is also about slowing down and trying to feel all of the emotions that you could possibly feel and coming back to yourself as like that connection and that relationship that is center in your life is like how are you taking care of you and your own needs and learning to feel all the wide variety of emotions that are out there, because so often especially with like addiction work, people are worried that stopping the the drug or the alcohol or whatever it is that you're addicted to will make your life boring because you're like, this is the only thing that's giving me any kind of spark or joy. But it's often also the thing that is numbing you out to other sensations. And so learning how to stop that and put that down and physically feel your feelings. Sorry, it's become such a catchphrase now. But I think it's so important to realize that comfort does not equal safety, and like numbing yourself out does not equal joy and happiness.
Yeah, like coping strategies are not necessarily helpful, right? I think like that's also to reference Terrence Real again. That's actually something like because he works specifically on the domain of romantic relationships, and he says like these coping mechanisms are just kind of a way to like drag you by in a difficult situation, but they don't actually like deal with any of the underlying stuff. And I also want to make like really clear, and this is also something that Dean Spade says very explicitly, is like the conditions are shit. Like the conditions are shit. Like we live under like racial capitalism. Even when you're living in like a relatively privileged position from the rest of the world, like the things that we see, the things that we know, the things like how we exist in the world, like even when you're not fully paying attention to it, like there are just like these moments where you know what's happening, like whether it be like the climate crisis, whether it be the exploitation of workers in countries far, far away from you, right? Like whether it be like the knowledge of industrial agriculture or like the way that racialized people are treated, like all of these things, whether it be the genocide in Gaza, like I think we know, we have like a knowledge that these things are happening, and even if we like choose not to engage with them, like that is there. Like we have that in our collective whatever, like consciousness, and it feels bad. Like it feels bad. It's also supposed to feel bad. Like, I mean, let this radicalize you, right? But that is also just the reality of like, you can numb yourself out all you want, but like at the end of the day, you're not dealing with the things that you can control, and we're not finding ways to kind of collectively deal with the things that are way bigger than us. And yeah, I think these are really like complicated parts of um, also being engaged in struggle, of being engaged in activism, of being engaged with kind of community organizing. Is it's just like we are all hurting, and there's like a lot of cortisol being released in our brains, especially if you're doing like direct action, if you're doing like really militant like frontline work. Like there's a lot of adrenaline, there's a lot of cortisol, like there's a very like heightened energy that comes free with that. And those things can also like low key be ways to numb yourself, right? To link the personal work to the political work, just real quick.
I got some good quotes that I want to add on to what you just beautifully said. Of the reality is that shit is very, very fucked up and intense right now, and we need skills for being with each other in distress just as much as we need skills for being with each other in delight. Our attempts to live a life that looks good in photos, filled with status objects and coveted experiences, gets in the way of the unglamorous work of creating and inhabiting the relationships we crave. These relationships, not others' perceptions of who we are, will sustain us through hard times. As well as, I'm just going to read them and then we'll talk about them. The materialistic emphasis on perfection, on competing to look happy, to show off a perfect life, also insists we think positive while shaming bad feelings. What actually makes people's lives meaningful is having connected relationships, being part of something you care about, helping others, and playing a role in stopping injustice. I think that that is such an important part. And the last little nugget for this trifecta is although I've been taught by society to feel shame and self hatred in the daily indignities of the workplace or family, I can recover the ability to feel rage, grief, and incitement to action instead. And I think that that last part really ties it all together of we live in fucked up times. We need these relationships to sustain us, and it's what gives our life meaning. It is what gives us love and affection and belonging and all the things that really matters in this world. And importantly, when we do that and we start to do this work of regaining our rage, we also regain the incitement to action. Because how much are you numbing yourself just to avoid and get rid of the uncomfortable truths that are plaguing us all the time? And learning to actually be angry about it again will make you want to do something in a very grounded way. And I think it's a good point of that doesn't mean go out and just try to get yourself arrested immediately, because what are you trying to do there? Just let people know that we're mad? Because yeah, we're mad, but like in what ways can we actually shut down like Ende Gelände is a great one here in Germany, where people will go to, I think it's a power plant, and just stop it. Like they cannot continue, and I think it only works for like 5 minutes at a time, but they do it every single year, and it costs the company like billions of dollars having to stop it and then start it up again. And that does something, and it's a group, it's a sustained effort. Like this is something that makes lasting change, and feeling grounded in yourself gives you that beat to also be in control. What is it that I want to do, and how can I not react out of anger, but kind of hone in that incitement to action in a productive way that helps the movement overall.
Yeah, and I also think like one of the things I like about Indigo Land is, of course, that it's been going on for a very long time. So you also can really join and have this feeling of like I'm part of this sustained movement where a lot of other people have come before me and done the same thing that I'm about to do. I think that's also important to like have like when, because we're talking a lot about relationships, and I think like that's Dean Spade tends to talk about relationships kind of in real time, but I'm also starting to think about relationships as like relationships that we have to the past and the future, right? So like using a little bit more of this lens of like being connected to like what came before me and being connected to what comes after me. And I think like those are places that our political movements and like generally like resistance movements in our context can really be helpful in finding belonging, right? And feeling connected to the long line of struggle that we do actually in the end come from. And yeah, so like this is really to like connect ourselves and like situate ourselves also, and also to remind us that it's not just about us, which I think is like a really good thing when we're thinking about relationality, because like there's a lot of ego, I think, in the West. I think individualism cultivates like a very strong sense of like the ego of like me, like this idea that I have in my head about myself and like who I am and what I do and what I am like, and I don't want that to be threatened at all, like um and yeah, I think like a big part of like this relationship work in general, but I think also a big part of movement work and like thinking about an alternative way of existing in the world and existing with each other is like thinking about the dissolution of the ego. Like, how can I let go of this part of me that's very like rigid, that's very fixed, like this part that Terry Real would call the adaptive child, right? Like, that has learned from my family, from my systems, how to behave, how to put myself, how to position myself in a way so that I can always be good, so I can always be okay, so I can survive. I think like trying to find that part of ourselves and like dissolve it a little bit or like soften its edges, you know, like Real has this like very specific kind of like mental image of like this child inside of you is driving the car and you have to like put it on your lap and take its sticky hands off the wheel. And I think like this is like a really nice like mental image, right? Because like we also don't want to be like, because Spade also goes into this a bit more at the end of the chapter, like when do we need more rigor and discipline and when do we actually need more gentleness? And I think like that's like a key here is like finding how can we take that child onto our lap and hug it, um, while also being disciplined with ourselves of like, hey, like you need to stop driving this car, like don't drive the car.
I recently was at a festival. There was like a party in the night, and the next morning, someone was like, "Hey, can I check in with you about like last night and what happened?" Because I was hanging out with someone. We then brought like a third person in to our group, and then I was just like, "Oh, actually, I don't want to do this," and I left. And um, and so he was just checking in. He was just like, "Are you okay?" You know, and it was totally fine. I'm trying to like keep it concise and not go into details, but he was just like, "Can I don't know if an apology is needed because I know that you left, but would you mind holding space if I just kind of went into that feeling for a bit?" And I was like, "Sure." And so I just kind of, sat there, took a deep breath, and his entire posture changed, and he went, "Oh my God, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Like I joined and then you left, and that means that like I did something and you felt rejected, and like I didn't mean to reject you, like what?" And just like really for about 30 seconds just let that feeling all out, and then was like, ugh, okay, yeah, and like, and how do you feel? And I was just like, no, like we had planned to invite you in, you were not the reason that I left, like I like felt this and this and this way, like absolutely no apology needed. And he was like, "Great, well thank you so much for still hearing that." And it was just so nice because instead of feeling like the whiny emotion kind of took over and was like the lead response, he was like, "Hey, can we just take a second to invite that feeling in and give it its space so that I can continue to like be in that kind of more adult mode for the rest of the
Mm-hmm.
conversation." And watching that happen in real time was just so inspiring. I was like, "Wow, thank
Yeah,
you. Like
beautiful.
this is coming with me."
Yeah, it's good, right? Because like when we do that, we also like, I think being able to identify that feeling or like that kind of like adaptation, right? Like that way of wanting to deal with a situation, and then putting it here and being like, let's look at it together. You know, like it's out of me and we can both see it, and it's kind of like hee 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 hee. It also stops us from like hyper identifying with it, because I think like that's the thing. I was feeling really bad about myself last week, you know, because we called about it and I cried. Um,
Proud of you.
and thank you. And one of the things, and it's interesting because I'm thinking also about it in terms of like, am I just looking for outside approval and like people to be like, no, don't worry, like you're amazing, like, and I think a part of it is that, like, I think a part of it is just me being like, hey, can you bolster my self-esteem for a second? um but another part of it is just to like let it be there and to put it out, because the more I stay with it myself, and the more I kind of like isolate myself in my like little individual pocket of just me, just Carson, like having to deal with this completely by myself, I think the more identified I actually become with it, and the more stuck I start to feel with it, and the more I isolate myself from other people. And this is like really, yeah, something that I've been thinking about is just like how other people are so necessary for us to grow, because they see us in ways that we can't see ourselves, so they can give us feedback in ways that we can't give ourselves feedback. But also just like we need that outside perspective sometimes to also see ourselves more clearly. So it's not even just like about what your perspective on me would mean. It's about how does my perspective of myself change when I share with you something that's going on with me. So yeah, I don't know, I was just thinking about that. And that's also why relationships are important, and also politically important, because this also happens in our politics, right? Like, yeah, when we're developing new ways of thinking, or when we're like dealing with a really challenging thing, like when we're dealing with like whiteness, for example, or when we're dealing with kind of heteropatriarchy or any of the other like systems of domination, and like the ways that those have ingrained themselves into us, and we're trying to like unlearn our privilege and all of this, right? Or like unlearn these systems. It's really helpful to have someone else with you, like to talk about it with, because it's really hard to do it by yourself. And I think also like what happens is like you end up ruminating on it, and that actually ends up like, I think Spade also talks about this in this chapter, right? Like these, how your brain, he has a friend who says like your brain is like a vinyl, and it's got all these deep grooves in it, and those deep grooves are like the emotions or the thought patterns or whatever that you've had a lot, and they just keep getting deeper and deeper and deeper. And so like when we're ruminating on like, how do I stop identifying with whiteness, or like how do I stop being so dominant in this conversation, or like how do I stop like identifying myself with like the bourgeoisie, like the more we think about it and the more we're like stressing about it, like we're also like consistently reaffirming that connection. And I think it's important that we find ways to break that, and we can only do that together, because like there is just, your brain only gets you this far, you know, like by yourself.
And that is why my offering is look, I'm not trying to make this entire podcast episode just one big ad. But I do think that this is such a core reason why I'm saying you need to come in as a duo of some sort. Like, I think it's so interesting to look at the system that you're part of. And I think it's too difficult to come to work in a program for 12 weeks with like your entire community and everyone that you've ever related to. But if there's one person who really sees you and can be that kind of accountability partner, where you can be like, I really want to give you feedback, I really trust you to give me feedback, and how can we work on this together as a tool for this like political movement. And I think something that I also want to point out is I believe I work best with people who have like really great intentions, are like, I totally see this and I think it's so important and I just don't know how to get started. Those are the people that I really want to work with. Yeah, I think that is where I can make a big impact on the world. And I want to make an impact on the world. I want to cure injustice, and I want to inspire other people to work with me and just make the world like a little bit nicer and kinder. Yeah.
Yeah, more loving, right? Like, I mean, I think like for me a big part of it is just like, what do we mean when we talk about revolutionary love? Like, do we understand like the depths of what that looks like, and how much is necessary to change in how we relate to each other? And that's why we're reading this book together and talking
I mean, not to open up a new topic, but also Dean Spade in this chapter is still relevant. talks about in the 60s and 70s when the feminist movement and the queer movement were talking about, like, hey, there's a lot of domestic violence and childhood abuse and like all of these things that are happening because the institution of marriage is isolating people and keeping them forced in these situations that are actively harmful. And so how can we kind of abolish marriage as an institution? And by the time the backlash hit, then like the 90s and early 2000s was all about like, hey, marriage is great, the gays actually want to get married, um, and that's the new ideal. And so it's these things of like, how can we truly start to think of breaking down these systems and creating a new world that fit our values, like the queers in the 60s saying chosen family and inter-community support and all of these other ways of living are also possible. And how can we resist that kind of enveloping of those ideas into more palatable like versions of themselves that kind of go back into the system? And so that's what we mean by radical love as well, is like having the support system and the safety, not comfort, to be open to being creative and imagining new worlds and like trying to put them into practice.
Mm-hmm.
So let's all do that together.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think like this is also one of the reasons that like the romantic relationship is something that I'm interested in, like the romantic relationship and what does it mean to have like revolutionary love in the romantic relationship. I mean, there's a very in this book there's a very kind of clear out like very nice short outline of where the idea of romance came from, like how much like this idea of romance as a indicator of whether you want to spend your life with someone or that whether that's going to be like your family or your sexual partner or whatever, how much that's developed over the last like 100 years, and become so much more important. So for an even deeper analysis of this, there's the book Relationship Anarchy by Juan Carlos Perez Cortez, and there like there's like even more of kind of like an extensive history of marriage and of the structures of monogamy and like all of the ways in which like these things serve the system. Either way, I think very quickly the romantic relationship has started to occupy like a massive part of her life, right? Like this is like the isolation and like all of these other things that are being talked about in this book. I think a lot of the stuff that we've talked about before. This is why this interests me because one of the things that keeps coming back also in this chapter is why do we tend to be our worst selves in our romantic relationships? Why are our romantic relationships the place where like kind of like the most fucked up parts of ourselves come out and where we behave like children and where like all of this childhood stuff gets triggered? And so why is that happening in this relationship? And I think that's an interesting question, but for me, I think the even more interesting question is like, how can we use those things to find liberation, right? Like, how can we use all of those triggers, all of those feelings of possessiveness, of ownership, of all of these things that capitalism and heterosexuality and everything has taught us about like what it means to be in relationship to each other? How can we use like the disentanglement of ourselves from those systems in these relationships by working with our triggers to find liberation and to like research that like really in like the everyday life, right? So this is why I'm also starting a new little thing. Now I also get to do my plug. We've been talking for long enough that I think that it's fine. Like this entire episode is not an advertisement. We've been talking a lot.
No, this
But
makes me very excited.
yeah. So I, as like a queer person, as a polyamorous person, I think I'm like after like beyond polyamory at this point. Like it doesn't feel like the right signifier for me anymore. More on that in a different episode. But as a queer person coming from like this perspective, I am going to be starting doing some relationship coaching. So if you are interested in this, you can send an email at the email which will be in the show notes / bio of this video.
Ooh.
Yay!
Snap, 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 snaps.
And scary. And
if you want to join, mine are called Intimacy of Harm, the practice sessions. It's 12 weeks, starts on September 17th. The format is you with the person that you sign up with, not like full group, but I might do some full group calls every now and then if people are interested. And the link to that will also be in the description. And if you
And
ever wanted to work with Carson and I together, especially if it's like a bigger group, like if you have like VG issues or something where like the group is bigger and it might be difficult for one person to keep an eye on everything, we can also do this work together.
all right, well, thank you for listening to Pieces. You can find us on Patreon through the show notes, where we would love to hear what stuff resonated with you, where your questions were, or what you would like us to expand upon.
We hope you found some moments of learning and reflection, and we hope you tune in for our next conversations.
Which will be a continuation of this.
Yeah, for chapter 2. Dean Spade,
Yay!
chapter 2.
We only got
Love
through
in a
one
fucked up
chapter.
world. Dean Spade, chapter 2. Love in a fucked up world.
Boom.
You know he's cool because he swears in the book.
Okay.
Okay, bye.
Bye.